You don't notice it at first, but when you're constantly chasing, everything feels just out of reach. Peace, love, clarity, validation. It all moves a little faster than you can keep up with. So you keep running. You chase moments. You chase approval. You chase people, dreams, outcomes, timelines. But what no one tells you is this: the more you chase something, the more it runs. Not because it doesn't want to find you, but because your energy says, I don't have it yet. Chasing doesn't create closeness. It creates distance. It creates pressure. It creates tension. And before long, you start chasing your own worth without even realizing it. You chase feeling enough. You chase calm. You chase clarity like it's something you have to hunt down. But here's the truth most people never realize until they're burned out. You were never supposed to chase the things that are meant for you. Not peace, not love, not alignment, not your purpose, not your timing, because the moment you start chasing, you're already running in the wrong direction. You've made the thing you want bigger than you, and you've made yourself smaller than it. That's why nothing lands. That's why it never feels like enough. That's why even when you get what you want, it slips right through. Chasing is rooted in fear, in lack, in the quiet belief that what you desire is far away, and it won't come unless you work for it endlessly. But what if the opposite is true? What if the thing you're trying so hard to get is actually trying to get to you, but you keep pushing it away with all your effort? The less you chase, the more comes to you. Not because you've given up, but because you finally become someone who knows what's meant for you will feel peaceful when it arrives. Not like a prize you had to bleed for. The hardest part about stopping the chase is that it feels like you're doing something wrong, because slowing down looks a lot like giving up at first. You've spent so long trying to hold everything together that not chasing feels like falling behind. You start asking yourself, am I being lazy? Am I settling? Am I missing my chance? But you're not falling behind. You're just finally catching up to yourself, because when you're always chasing, you're not in your life, you're ahead of it. You're thinking 5 steps ahead of every conversation, playing out every possibility in your mind, preparing for pain before it even happens. And all of that effort, it disconnects you from presence, from trust, from the moment that's already here waiting to support you. That's what chasing does. It teaches your nervous system that safety only comes when you're achieving, that love only arrives when you've earned it, that rest is only allowed after you've done enough. But here's the truth. Peace doesn't wait for you at the finish line. It lives in the space you make when you stop sprinting toward things that don't need to be forced. And when you finally let yourself breathe, without trying to fix, win, or control, you begin to notice something you've never had time to feel before. You don't need to push life into alignment. Life starts to align on its own when you stop fighting it. You begin to sense what feels light and what feels heavy. You start hearing the quiet no inside your body before your brain talks over it. You stop grasping, and things begin arriving, not because you manipulated them into your hands, but because you made room. Chasing doesn't just exhaust your body, it clouds your intuition. And when that fog starts to lift, you don't feel passive. You feel powerful in a new way. Not power from force, but power from clarity. From finally trusting that you don't have to chase what you're already aligned with. At some point, you realized chasing wasn't just something you did. It was who you thought you had to be. The productive one, the driven one, the one who goes after it no matter what. You wore that identity like armor. You told yourself, if I stop pushing, I'll lose everything. If I slow down, I'll fall behind. But the truth is, you weren't running towards something. You were running away. From stillness, from emptiness, from the uncomfortable silence that shows up when there's nothing left to chase. Because when you stop chasing, you're finally left with yourself. And if you've built your entire sense of worth on movement, presence can feel like nothing. You sit in a quiet room with no goals to hit, no fires to put out, no crisis to manage, and suddenly you're not sure who you are without the hustle. That's the moment most people go back. Back to the pressure, back to the planning, back to proving. Not because they want to, but because chasing is familiar pain. It gives you a role. It gives you something to wake up and fix. It gives you a story. I'm working on it. I'm getting there. Soon I'll be free. But freedom never comes from getting there. It comes from deciding you don't have to run anymore. And slowly, you begin to rebuild. not as someone who's constantly reaching, but as someone who's finally receiving. You walk through life differently. You don't grab for what's not ready. You don't argue with closed doors. You don't cling to things that don't feel right just because you're afraid of letting go. You become someone who listens, not just to others, but to yourself. You trust your no. You trust your pause. You trust the timing that once felt too quiet to believe in. And the beautiful part is, when you're no longer desperate to chase anything, what's real finally has space to find you. When you stop chasing, something powerful begins to happen. But it's not loud. It's subtle, quiet, almost easy to miss, because it doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It shows up in the spaces in between. You walk into a room and you're not scanning for who needs you. You're not analyzing how you're being perceived. You're not wondering what energy you need to match in order to belong. You just walk in as yourself, unfiltered, unrushed, unbothered. That's what happens when you stop living in pursuit mode. You start experiencing life in presence mode. You notice more, the tension in your shoulders that was always there but never questioned, the way the sunlight hits your wall in the morning, the conversations that actually feel nourishing instead of draining. You stop engaging with what doesn't feel aligned. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for your pace, your needs, your clarity. And the wildest part? People feel it without you saying a word. They feel that shift in your energy. You're not harder, you're not colder, but you're clearer. And that clarity becomes a boundary. It tells the world, I'm no longer available for what pulls me out of myself. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to fight for it. You just live it, and everything adjusts around you. And sure, not everyone will like that version of you. Some people only knew the version of you who chased their approval, the one who overextended, over-delivered, overstayed, the one who needed to be needed more than they needed to be free. But that's not you anymore. You don't need to force connections to feel loved. You don't need to push your purpose to feel valuable. You don't need to control outcomes to feel safe. Because now your value isn't based on the hustle. It's based on how deeply you can stay in your center, even when everything around you is moving. And from that center, things begin to come. Not all at once, not always the way you imagined, but effortlessly, quietly, steadily, like they were waiting for you to finally stop trying so hard to earn them. When you've stopped chasing for long enough, you start to understand something you couldn't see before. The things you were running after weren't always meant for you. Some of them were distractions. Some of them were projections of who you thought you had to be. Some of them were just noise, dressed up as purpose. But now you're not chasing. You're attracting. You're creating space. You're letting things come when they're meant to, not when you're desperate for them. And that changes everything. Your relationships soften, not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer trying to convince anyone to stay. Your decisions feel clearer, not because you know all the answers, but because you've stopped outsourcing your worth to outcomes. Your mind gets quieter, not because you've silenced every thought, but because you no longer believe every one of them is urgent. You start responding instead of reacting. You start resting without guilt. You start noticing how much life happens when you're not chasing it. A conversation becomes deeper when you're not trying to sound wise. A walk outside becomes sacred when you're not trying to burn calories. An idea flows freely when you're not trying to monetize it. That's the kind of abundance that can't be measured, but it can be felt. You begin to feel whole without needing more. You begin to feel loved without needing to perform. You begin to feel enough, not someday, but here. And what you realize in those still, honest moments is this: you were never waiting for the world to give you peace. You were waiting for yourself to stop interrupting it. And now you're starting to trust that you don't have to fight for what's already yours. You don't have to explain your pace. You don't have to justify your softness. You don't have to chase what's real, because what's real will stay. Not because you begged it to, but because you became the kind of person it wants to stay with. You begin to carry yourself differently, not louder, not with ego, but with something more unshakable. A quiet inner certainty that doesn't need to be validated. You're not waiting to be chosen anymore. You're not hoping someone else will finally see your value. You're not depending on the next success, the next compliment, the next milestone to feel like you're enough. Because when you stop chasing, You stop begging life to confirm that you matter. You already know you do. You stop asking, "What more can I do to be loved?" And instead ask, "Does this even feel loving to me?" You stop trying to become someone better, and instead start honoring who you already are. Not the polished version, but the real, messy, human version that's been buried beneath the effort for too long. And slowly, your energy starts to shift without you even realizing it. You're not chasing outcomes. You're aligning with truth. You're not hunting for clarity. You're becoming clear. You're not trying to control everything. You're letting things unfold on their own timeline. And that's magnetic. People feel the difference. They lean in. They respond. Not because you're doing more, but because you're finally being more of who you actually are. No scripts, no pressure, no pretending to be unaffected while dying inside. Now, you speak when you're ready, not when you feel obligated. Now, you rest without narrating it as self-care. Now, you create, not to be seen, but because something wants to move through you. That's the space where real life begins. Not the life you planned, not the one you carefully crafted with endless effort, but the one that comes to meet you, naturally, easily, when you finally stop chasing it. Because in that space, you're not resisting, you're receiving. Not because you've earned it, but because you finally believe. You don't have to chase what's already aligned with your soul. Once you've let go of the chase for long enough, you stop measuring your life in milestones. You stop watching the clock like it owes you something. You stop comparing your timeline to people who are chasing things you no longer want. And suddenly, you're no longer running towards something. You're living in something, fully, freely. For the first time in years, you wake up without pressure in your chest. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're not starting the day already bracing for battle. You move slower, but with more clarity. You speak softer, but with more weight. You say less, but it means more. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing, life starts to move toward you. Not faster, but more clearly. You don't attract more chaos. You attract more peace, more alignment, more opportunities that don't feel like pressure. They feel like invitations. You stop gripping everything so tightly. You stop rehearsing every version of who you need to be for each person. You just exist. And somehow, it's more than enough. And what once felt terrifying, the quiet, the stillness, the unknown, now feels like a home you were always meant to return to. You realize your energy is precious, not because it's limited, but because it's no longer up for negotiation. You stop explaining yourself to be understood. You stop chasing closure that doesn't bring peace. You stop performing worthiness in spaces that never saw your fullness anyway. And you realize, this is the version of you that was always waiting. Not the one who figured it all out, not the one who won the race, but the one who finally realized there was no race. It was always about remembering, not achieving, not catching up, just remembering how to live. From stillness, from enoughness, from presence. And the moment you taste that, even for a second, everything else you were chasing suddenly feels so small. So here you are, not chasing, not forcing, not performing, just here. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. You don't need to rush back into effort. You don't need to fill the silence with strategy. You don't need to rebuild the version of you that only knew how to move from urgency. Because now you've remembered something most people spend a lifetime running from. The less you chase, the more comes to you. The more space you create, the more life rises to meet you. The more you trust, the more you return to yourself. So take this moment, not as advice, but as a mirror. Let it reflect something you already knew deep down. You never had to run to receive.